what do you make right now, Eric, about our country, our country as a whole?
It's a big question. It's a broad question, and I'll give you a broad answer. But I think we are on the verge of civil war. And when I say civil war, I don't mean civil war like obviously we experienced in our history back in the 1800s. But I think that the divide in our country has become so pronounced and profound that there's no chance of it swinging back. I told my wife this a couple months ago. Throughout my life, I've always watched politics and I've always watched current events. And I think as a country, as a culture, we've always taken comfort knowing, even if it was subconsciously, that, if it swings too far to the right, that's all right because it's going to swing back to the left. And if it gets too far to the left, it's going to swing back to the right. And I think that sense of comfort, that gray area, that secure area, that safety zone between one extreme and the other has always been so comfortable for us. We just assumed it was always going to be there. I don't think that anymore. I think that the divide is getting greater and greater. I think people are less educated because nobody reads. Nobody listens to a real issue or a real policy. Nobody analyzes much of anything. They read bumper stickers in response to Twitter feeds. And that's where our thought processes are limited to. And as a result of that, I think the divide is growing even wider.
Yeah, and I think the laziness also makes people be more apt to just read headlines and fake news because they don't have the time. Hey, look, when you got to pay the rent and you got to, pay the bills and you got kids that you got to take care of and you want to stay in shape and you want to get healthy food. And it's pretty hard to be dedicated to see the intricacies of politics. You know what I'm saying? That's why you see such low voter turnout and apathy because most people don't even know what the fuck is going on. I don't even know the name of half the representatives or council, you know what I'm saying, in politics here where I live in California, because I just don't have time for that anymore. And so, like you said, even when you read the way that people used to talk before, their oratory skills back then, you didn't have the internet and you didn't have all these things. You had a lot of time to read and you had a lot of time to learn how to write. Everything's so fast now. You know what I'm saying?
It's so fascinating. If you think back to when I was a kid growing up in the 60s, especially towards the latter part of the 60s, because then I was old enough. I was 13, 14 years old. The Vietnam War was a big thing. The Watergate was obviously a big thing. That was later on in the early 70s. But that era of time, when I really became interested in politics and cultural and political events, you really only had 3 or 4 sources of information. You had your local paper, but your local paper was local stuff. You had ABC, NBC, CBS, and even though there was only 3, networks, or PBS was still there, but not readily accessible. But there was a professionalism. There was a thoroughness in giving you 2 sides of a story or an issue. And now, because it's become so competitive, now there's, all the cable outlets, all the networks, they're gutting each other. NBC is like, way down below a cable outlet, and because that everybody's becoming so much more competitive. And as a result of being competitive, they're doing a poor and poorer job of helping people to understand. So not only does the consumer, the guy working in a factory or the woman teaching school or whatever, working 3 or 4 jobs, not only does he or she not have the time, but the information that you are getting, even if you have the time, is so twisted and turned and inaccurate that nobody knows what to believe anymore.
Right. It's hard to, everybody distorts the truth so much. It's hard to have an honest conversation. And even back then, and you'll remember some of these names, Eric, these newsmen had a certain credibility, whether it was Walter Cronkite, whether it was Harry Reisner, those type of guys had a credibility with you. Today, they have no qualms about, I'm to the left, this is what I am, and this is what we're feeding you. You know what I'm saying? Before it was, you know what I'm saying, it was right down the middle, and we've lost that, which is a shame.
No, your basic, news outlets now are opinion outlets because they're really more opinion outlets than news outlets. But they're out there, they're competing with TMZ is what they're really competing with, and as a result of that, the information that we as the public are getting is so distorted and invaluable. And going back to the TED Talk, it's not designed to make you think. It's designed to make you feel, to make you angry or to make you fearful
Right.
or whatever it is. It's not designed to make you go, I wonder why this person wants to vote for this policy.
Right.
What is it about this policy that's controversial? And then do a little bit of digging or reading or thinking. They don't want you to do that.
And we're seeing, and the funny thing about it is we're seeing that populist playbook, being put into play in Europe. You know what I'm saying? And they're doing the same thing. Feeding on nationalism, immigration, on your emotions instead of, you know what I'm saying?
It's so true. And I want to be careful here that I don't, I'm going to ride the political fence with you here, Conan, just out of respect for your audience. You and I could, lock ourselves in a room and spend hours having a ball talking about this stuff. But, it's interesting you point out Europe. I've always said, because, when I was in high school, I was actually a student in Germany for a few months on a student exchange program. And when I went, this was latter part of 1973. And I remember going over to, Germany and seeing a disco for the first time. I never even heard of what a disco was, right? And I come back to the States, and a few years later, all of a sudden, disco's hot. And I started recognizing that things that, whether it's music or fashion or art or many things, it kind of migrates west. It gets hot, music, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, you name it, in the 60s. It all came west from Europe. And I've always believed that if you look at Europe, kind of from a macro perspective, whether it's fashion, music, government, whatever, culture, you'll find that the same types of things will arrive here 3 or 4 or 5 years later. So all you have to do now, for example, and I know we're talking about, democratic socialism is a big thing that we talk about now, not me, but in the media. All you have to do is look at France. France has been on fire every single weekend for the last 6 months or a year because the people in France can't afford the socialistic programs that France is trying to offer its citizens. They can't afford it. It's finally not working anymore, and people are going, stop, enough. You look at immigration and the adverse impact that it's had on governments and their ability to provide for their citizens across the boards and the deficits that it's creating. The fact that so many of these immigrants are coming in so fast and in such an unregulated way that there's no assimilation. Then it just turns into little pockets of what is essentially gang warfare based on wherever it is you came from. I mean, it's a dangerous.
And here's a big problem with immigration is that unfortunately, and this is how hard it must be, they've been kicking that can, as far as I can remember, since the Reagan administration, and nobody's done anything about it. So until you have a comprehensive immigration plan, this is what you're going to have.
I agree. It's a fucking mess, and
right.
It has been a fucking mess. It's only gotten worse now. It's become.
And here's the worst part. Here's the worst part. This is how beholden we are to immigration. The whole restaurant, hotel, construction, agriculture, horse racing, bro, that shit would probably close down overnight if you got rid of all the immigrants. They've got to find out a way, like I said before, to have a comprehensive, if you've been here, how can you stay here? If you're coming from outside, a vetting process. I mean, it's just, and nobody's been able to fix this, or nobody's wanted to fix it. I don't know what's going on.
Nobody's had the balls to fix it. Nobody's had the balls to fix it because it's a tough decision that's going to be painful to someone. Right. Someone's going to have to pay the price for that. And that's the only way it's going to work.
Somebody's got to put their foot down and fix it. Some administration, some prisons got, this is where the buck stops. This is what it is. And that's how it is, because that, it's almost like a pipe that's broken. It just keeps leaking. What were you going to say, Disco?
It's funny when Eric, when you were on here, when we had you on this podcast the first time, it's when you had started that podcast a couple of years ago where you were just doing politics and stuff. And we were discussing, this is kind of like, this isn't that long ago. That's what I find fascinating about this. We're talking about identity politics. And I thought we were at identity politics is here and it's like terrible. I can't believe how it's even gotten so much progressively worse. Because back, these days it's, you can't have discussions with people anymore. That's the thing. You can't, it's like you said, you made the perfect point. It's competitive. And all people ever do when they talk politics with your friends even is you just argue. And it's funny, what I find when I try to have discussions with my friends about politics, I'll send them like a clip of something. Hey, watch this. And if it'll be like a guy, maybe like even a liberal talking on Fox News to them, so they won't watch it because they go, "Oh, that's Fox News." I'm like, no, I want you to listen to what the person's saying here. I want to talk about what he said to see if you agree or disagree with that. You can't even get people to have discussions anymore. And that's like, when you're talking about like we're on the verge of civil war. It's like when you're not even willing to discuss and all you want to do is argue, bro. Well, what's the next thing that happens? It's like you actually start fighting. And I see that. I mean, you're right. I see it going just that way. Do you agree with that?
No, I do, and like I said, I want to be clear. I don't see it as an armed, north and south.
No, not that, but escalation. Yeah,
I think it has escalated to the point where we're all now huddled in our own individual ideological bunkers. Most people, as you pointed out, Disco, and I agree with you 100%, are either afraid or insecure enough in their own beliefs to engage in a conversation.
Eric, what do you think happened? What do you think happened? What happened? This is not what we grew up in. What happened? Is this just been exacerbated, and it started maybe around the Vietnam era, as you said, when maybe the public for the first time saw the government in a negative light because it had been exposed, and now we didn't trust politicians, and it's just been a snowball effect. What do you think happened?
I mean, I think that's arguable, Conan. I think that's a good point. I think the late 60s and the early 70s, especially with Watergate, the Vietnam War, the hippie movement, the peace movement, if you will, all kind of opened up a Pandora's box and allowed or forced or gave the ability for people to look at governments in a different way. The Kennedy era was, I think, the last of the era of our government when everybody, whether you were Republican, Democrat, or in between, that was the president of the United States. This was the United States of America. This is the White House.
Right.
Now, half the people you invite to the White House will turn down the invitation. It's like you're asking them to go to a fucking massage parlor in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
50-50, whether you're going or not.
Right.
But I think, it probably started in the late 60s when we looked at the government differently. But I really do believe, and it's not because I'm older and, I'm overwhelmed by social media. I use social media every day. I love social media. I'm learning about social media. Every minute I'm on it, I learn something new, and I love that. And I'm grateful that I'm alive during this time. But I will tell you the downside. The downside is that people are now using social media, and I'm talking about governments. I'm talking about people that are trying to influence governments. I'm talking about lobbying groups. I'm talking about foreign governments, as we saw with Russia, are now using this thing we call social media that we have become fucking addicted to. Like, to the point, and I'm one of them. I hate to admit it. If I leave the house, I get halfway down my driveway and I reach in my pocket for my phone and it's not there, I'm going to have a goddamn panic attack.
Right.
Not because I'm afraid I'm going to miss a phone call, because nobody calls me anymore. Nobody wants to talk to me anymore. But I get all of my information off of this gimmick. And if I don't have this gimmick within arm's fucking reach, I start to sweat like a crack whore.
Bro, how wild is that? We grew up when we didn't even have that gimmick. We didn't even think about it. And that's all we think about now. Where's my fucking phone? And I got, how much battery life do I have? And that's, you know what I'm saying? It's weird. Our life revolves around it, and it's so weird, Eric, because when you see, like you said, all these places, these mining sites and Cambridge Analytics and Analytica or whatever that they were giving, Facebook was paying to get information from them, and so were other governments. It's just crazy that all our shit that's in our computer really never gets erased.
No, and here's the scarier thing, Conan. It's not about what's in our computer or in our phone. It's the information that's in our phone that a third party can determine what's in our minds. They can analyze through analytics and algorithms what type of person you are. Now, they may not be 100% right, but there are people working right now on information that they sucked off your phone, and they're trying to figure out what time of day you like to get up, where you like to go first, how often you have sex, what things you like to watch on television, what kind of music you like. And once I put all that into a little pot and stir it up, I can tell you who you're going to vote for. Now I want to know how I can use that information to affect the way you're thinking. That's the frightening part.
Part 2 of Keeping It 100 with Conan's interview with Eric Bischoff will air on next week's episode. But if you want to hear the full hour's worth of audio, you can catch it now on the Patreon site at patreon.com/Conan and Conan.me.